My name is Andrew Kudless. I'm a professor here at the University of Houston, and I also run a practice called Matsys. I'm new to Houston. I just started a few weeks ago, so I've previously taught at the California College of the Arts, Ohio State University, and many workshops kind of all over the country. That's a really hard question because I've lived kind of all over the world, and each place contributes to who I am. I don't feel it's like some people they grow up, they go to school, they work all in the same city, but I don't have that at all. So I grew up on the East Coast of the United States, outside of New York City. I then went to university in New Orleans, Louisiana, for my first degree in architecture. Then I moved to Japan and studied architecture there for another year, and then moved to Portland, Oregon, and worked for Allied Works Architecture, mostly working on museums for 4 years, and then to grad school in London, the Architectural Association, the Emergent Technologies and Design program. And let's see, where was I? Ohio State University, where I started my teaching career and kind of established my practice. That was in 2005. So from there, I was there for 2 years, and then for the last 12 and a half years, I was in California, in San Francisco and Oakland, teaching at the California College of the Arts. So it's been kind of all over, and there are other places, New Zealand, Australia, for like 6 months at a time, teaching other places. Each place gave me something different, that brought me to this place today. So I think I'd say Japan, and probably had maybe the biggest influence on me, because it was I don't know if this happened to you, but like after 5 years of studying architecture, I was kind of burnt out on architecture, and I've been thinking I wanted to be an architect my whole life. But then after you go through school, you begin to wonder sometimes. And I wasn't really going to school in Japan. I just had a connection with the university, and it was very casual. So it was really just about my own interests. I could just do whatever I wanted. I had a fellowship, so it was very luxurious in a way, a very generous kind of place. So I didn't have to do anything in a way. So in a normal job, like you have to do, this project, or you have to do in a school, you have to do this assignment. But to have the freedom to just choose to do whatever I wanted was great. And it forced me to, like you have to kind of decide, like, why am I getting up in the morning? There's no one's telling me to get up and do anything. So I just started walking around and biking around Kyoto and Osaka and Kobe, and just looking at architecture. And so I became just fascinated in a way that I'd been always fascinated with architecture, but in this case, it was just like, how do cities grow? How does the material, the making of architecture, how does it all happen? And also obviously with Japan, just a kind of fascination with the craft. Just so many beautiful objects and cities and gardens, and I should say not maybe cities. The cities themselves are quite ugly, but like you get used to it, and you find kind of beauty in these kind of unknown kind of spots in the city. Like a lot of the beauty is hidden. So my year there, I think, really influenced kind of my focus over the last, I don't know, whatever it's been, 20 years since I left. So yeah, I don't have any connections to architecture in my family exactly. I think the thing that maybe was the closest was my grandmother was a painter, but she only started painting when she was, I think, 60. But that was right when I was born, roughly, and maybe a little bit later. So I would spend part of my summer with her, and just sitting, watching her paint, and I would also then go, with her to markets where she would sell her paintings and sculptures and things like that. So we would bundle everything together. This was in Brooklyn, New York. So she didn't have a car. We didn't have so we would get on buses with all these paintings and and travel to art fairs. And so I would just sit with her and watch her talk about her work. And yeah, so it was, I think that was a very formative experience for me. My parents aren't in the arts or in architecture or anything like that. So although my father was a professor, so maybe some of the family business, stayed with me. But I think from a very young age, I was always interested in making things, and to the point where, when I was like 10 or 12 or something like that, all my friends and I were all skateboarders, and but I wasn't very good at skateboarding, but I loved to make the ramps and half pipes and all of that. So I got a lot of experience then, just like in carpentry and making larger structures, but wasn't actually very good at using them. But I loved designing them. And then, yeah, I decided to go to Tulane for a couple of different reasons. But the main one, I think, was, I don't know if it's like this in Peru, but like when I was going to high school, growing up in the Northeast, if you grow up in the Northeast, almost everyone goes to school in the Northeast. So it's just because there are so many schools right around there. I don't know if you grow up in Lima, you go to school in Lima, yeah. But I just wanted to have an adventure. I just wanted to go somewhere else and see a different part of the United States. So New Orleans is probably the most unique city in the United States. It doesn't look like any other city in the United States. It feels like the combination of French and Spanish and Creole and American influences is very unique. So I think it was a fantastic place to study architecture. You just see the mixture of all these different cultures and influences. And then I chose to go to the Architectural Association in London because after 4 years of working professionally then at Allied Works Architecture in Portland, this was in the late 90s, early 2000s, where most firms, I think by that point, had switched over from hand drafting to digital drafting and modeling. But I think at Allied Works, and probably at least at that time, and probably most firms at that time, I think a lot of firms made the switch from analog to digital just because they kind of had to. It wasn't because of like an innate interest in it. It was just that, well, it'll make drawings faster. We can plot drawings out faster. We can make changes faster. But it was really just a production switch. It wasn't like a conceptual switch of like how digital tools might change the design process itself. And when I looked around at different graduate programs, it seemed like the AA had the most interesting kind of philosophy around that the Emergent Technologies and Design program was really centered on that problem of like, how does design change when you introduce new technologies of fabrication or scripting or whatever it might be. When I was going through school at Tulane, I was actually quite bad at drawing. Like all of my peers, just not all of them, but most of them could draw much better than I could. And I was very insecure about my drawing ability, not just like sketching, but mechanical drafting, like with straight rulers and stuff like that. My drawings were always kind of dirty and my hand is a little shaky, and I wasn't very good at it. So I tried to compensate for that in two ways. One was I would build very large models. So if the professor asked for a model that was this big, I would make it the size of this table. It's just giant models. because I would basically decide not to do any drawings because I didn't find any pleasure in doing the drawings. I wasn't very good at it. My drawings didn't look as good as my peers, but I could make things really well. So I figured if I made something 4 times the scale of everyone else, maybe it would be okay. And for a couple of years it worked. I was getting good grades until one professor said, you have to learn how to draw, otherwise I'll fail you. So I did learn how to draw, but one of the ways I did that was the other reason I guess I started to be interested in computation was that if I couldn't draw as well as my peers, I could maybe either make very big models or use the computer to do renderings in my drawings. And there were only a few computers. This was like in the early 90s, mid 90s in the school. And so there was just like myself and 2 or 3 other students using the computers, and everyone else was doing everything by hand. And it was very difficult in a way because the software wasn't very good. A lot of the professors really didn't like the work that was coming out. They thought it was cheating or didn't have the quality of the hand, and it's true, it doesn't, but it had something else. So I began to look at books and look. Maybe there were a couple of early websites back then, but the work of Zaha Hadid, Greg Lynn, others were really influencing my work at the time. And I think there was Foreign Office architects. They were 2 professors, two different firms I'm talking about. So Office DA and Foreign Office Architects were 2 firms that I was really really appreciated their work. And I remember the work of Foreign Office Architects, they had won the Yokohama Port Terminal, and they were professors at the AA at the time. And the work was published on the cover of the AA files. And I remember seeing that, I'm not sure when, but it was right around maybe 2000, 99, somewhere in there. And I was just blown away by it. And that's when I started researching the AA as a place to go. So I had some experience using the computer just on my own, but no classes. I was learning everything on my own, and I just felt like I was kind of done with that. I needed to go and work with experts who really knew how to design using computation. It's a great question because there's influences on my professional work. The way I think just in general, there were mentors for how I teach. But I'd say maybe one of the first mentors was Brad Klopfel, who runs Allied Works Architecture. So I was there for 4 years. And although I was interested in using computation in a way that was different from the way it was being used at that time at Allied Works. The way that he was working, where it was just a very intensive kind of focus on materials and joinery, and I didn't really learn those things in school. In school, it was just paper and cardboard and whatever. It was all about form, and I didn't really understand how everything went together. And working there, I began, I think, to focus on that more, and his ability to bring in the kind of a history of art as well into the practice of architecture. Every project that we worked on, he was bringing in some, like Sol LeWitt or Eva Hesse or some other, mid-century conceptual artist or minimalist artist like Donald Judd or someone like that. And it was really refreshing to just have this constant engagement of kind of art and culture as part of the practice of architecture. Then going to the AA, my professors there were a huge influence on me. So it was just an amazing time to be at the AA because so I had 3 professors. One was Michael Weinstock, who still is at the AA and I think directing the Emergent Technologies and Design program. And Michael Hensel, who was co-directing the program with him. and part of Ocean North. And then Akim Menges was probably the most influential to me. He was the studio master. He had just graduated from the diploma unit, I think the year before, and had started teaching. And so he was just at the beginning of his teaching career, and I, basically was about to start my teaching career. So it was just a really productive time. And the combination of the three of them it was an excellent teaching team. And then after graduation, I'd say the mentors, too many in a way. Everyone, I feel like I learned, there were so many people at Ohio State, and then especially at CCA, who helped kind of form my teaching style. Kivi Sotama, I taught with him at Ohio State. And I think both in the way he was practicing as like a small design and architecture, urban, like that he was working at all different scales. And he still does to this day with his sister, or his sister I think is trained more as a ceramic artist maybe. And so they do everything from plates and light fixtures and houses and urban plans, and I saw that as a very attractive way of thinking about my practice. That I've never been interested, like you see some firms and they just do houses, other firms they just do institutional work or commercial work or something like that. I've always been interested in design at all scales, so to have a colleague like Kivi who was, doing work at all scales was, and experimental work at all scales was very influential for me. Yeah, there's many mentors, too many to count, who have influenced the work, but I've unfortunately never had the opportunity to meet them, or I just maybe heard them lecture or something like that. So Freyado, for sure, was one of the biggest influences on me. Miguel Fisac in Spain, working with concrete. And I should maybe back up a bit. All of these people, I kind of refer to them as like the architects who focused on the material practice of architecture, where I think there was they were the famous 20th century architects, but they a lot of them, like Kahn or Mies, Frank Lloyd Wright, Le Corbusier, some of them, they focused on a particular material, like steel with Mies, or concrete with Le Corbusier, but I think there was like a different grouping of architects who were maybe a combination of architects, engineers, contractors, where they were very, very focused on the material practice of really understanding the logic of a particular material system. So with Freyado, he studied a lot or researched a lot of different things, but like tensile structures. With Miguel Fisac was flexible formwork and concrete. Eladio Dieste in Uruguay, with bricks. Candela in Mexico with concrete and shell structures. So there's all of those architects, many others, Heinz Eisler in Switzerland, I believe, more of an engineer, were really influential, in that they were able to focus on a particular material system and then develop that through numerous projects. Where I think and this reflects more now on my teaching, but I feel the way that I was taught, at least in undergrad, and the way that I was like kind of the default, I say, teaching style within many of the universities that I've taught, site and program are somehow like the most important. Like you go into a studio and your professor says, we are doing a museum and it's downtown or it's whatever. And all of a sudden that's somehow what you're supposed to study. Like you study the site, you study the program, you take the program apart. But no one is ever talking about like what it's made of in a way, and like thinking that would be like that the material system would be in itself a research project. And you could spend an entire studio or entire career just focusing on the way that projects are made and developing innovative ways and then adapting that way of making for a particular site and program. So what I've tried to do in my own teaching is to get students to kind of find a passion around a particular way of making. And then we don't talk about site, we don't talk about program until they have a very good handle on what are the parameters of that material logic. And only then do they start manipulating that logic to make it fit with that particular site and program. Yeah, when you look at magazines and websites and you're just like, where are all these amazing architects coming from in Chile and Spain? And you're like, how do they have so many good houses and so many good museums and all of this? And I think it's a combination of things. Number one is, I think the culture might have a different respect for architects and architecture. I think the US doesn't, in general, have a great respect. I mean, you just saw, I don't know if you see in the news recently, but Trump is calling for all public buildings to be in a neoclassical style. So, there's already a fundamental problem with the way that I think the culture in the United States respects the discipline of architecture. The second problem, is we have very, very large firms here, and there's a culture of, there's like a legal culture that is very difficult if you don't have enough money to have the right insurance and the right, all of the healthcare and all of these things that are very difficult to start. You need to have a lot of money, I think, in the United States to be able to start a firm. For years I've been kind of insecure about my own standing, where I'm like, oh, how am I ever going to get these larger projects unless I can, get enough funding to have a whole office and all these things and I think I've begun to realize that I don't need that, that I am working on interesting projects and they're winning awards and I like the work. And it's done, I'm working at all different scales, from ceramics to lighting to furniture, pavilions, bigger multi-story structures, but I don't have to do all of that myself. Like, I can partner with people. So like Confluence Park that I recently completed with Lake Plato Architects, I think that was a great example of that, where I could, working with a bigger firm, they can do a lot of the things that a small firm can't do. And they have the experience to oversee a project of a certain size that I just don't have the experience or the means to do that. And I provide these firms with, a way of looking at the design process that maybe they don't have, using new technologies, new fabrication techniques. I'm able to maybe adapt more quickly than a large firm could. I've just moved to Houston, so it's kind of chaotic still, where it's not just because of the move, but it's also starting up this new lab at the university here, a new robotics and fabrication lab. The building's under construction, so my day-to-day life is really just managing that project. But I'm trying to keep my creative part of my practice kind of still going by I have a few different commissions, so I'm trying to it's been difficult to say, okay, to shut off being a professor and being the director of this lab. That's quite, it's full of kind of the management and logistics, and shut that off and then work on more the creative aspect of my practice. But I think I've always tried to balance those two. Sometimes a whole week gets taken over with administrative work, but then other times I can just spend a whole week just focusing on something, a small project. It's great. So I kind of fell into teaching a little bit. It wasn't intentional, let's say, although maybe in retrospect there was a subconscious desire to teach. But I was working in London, and I wanted to continue to work in London. I was working at an engineering firm, and I was teaching like part-time at the Architectural Association, but just like really basic, well, not all basic, like I was teaching like a intro to Photoshop, really like just very low level, kind of technology courses. But then I was also teaching on weekends, kind of scripting courses, in Rhino scripting at the time, to the graduate program, the MTech program that I had gone to. But my partner was in Ohio, and we'd been apart for a couple of years, so it was, how long can this last? So I applied to a teaching position because I didn't know any firms in Ohio, so I applied to a teaching position in Ohio, and the same week that I found out that my work permit was denied in Britain, I was accepted. My teaching position was accepted. My teaching position was accepted, and so I started teaching at that point, and it seemed like it was a good way to balance having a small practice in the United States and being able to have a kind of a constant income and constant employment through teaching, but then also have the ability to experiment and explore new ideas that I might not be able to if I solely focused on having a practice. This is a hard one. I think maybe the answer to both of those questions is possibly the same thing, in that the way that I think architects are traditionally taught design, or not design, I should say, but just how to work, like just the work of an architect, like the daily practice of being an architect. We're taught that it's like a passion, and you need to sacrifice everything for that passion. Like you stay up all night, you don't eat well, you don't exercise, all of these things that it's almost like a boot camp, in the military, and only the best will survive, out of that. And I went through that, and I think almost everyone, at least in the United States, and I don't know if it's the same all over the world, but there's this culture of architecture that I think is incredibly destructive to the profession of architecture in a way. I think some people think it's the only way that the profession can survive is to have this type of mentality, but I think that's totally wrong. And I think, number one, we teach too many people that I should say that the profession of architecture is big enough for all different types. There's definitely a very small area of architecture that is there for like the super passionate artist who's going to devote everything, sacrifice everything. There's room for that. But there's also room for the normal project manager. There's, that it's often actually the type of person who will run a firm really well is not often the same person as the person who will stay up all night and sacrifice everything. And I think it's been a huge detriment to architecture as a profession if we think that only the people who are going to sacrifice everything will also be the best to run a business. So I think, I know I was never trained how to run an office well, and I think part of it was that I was never trained to like just manage my time well, right? And I think some people naturally manage their time, and those people probably go off and start practices and do quite well. But so I think one of my challenges in the past was learning how to forget, the way that I was taught, and to learn another way of actually practicing. And I continue to struggle with that. So that's like what I'm still trying to do in the future, is like, how do you balance having, like what I was just saying a moment ago, how do you balance like having some part of your day that's creative work, and another part of your day that's maybe more focused on like pedagogy and like thinking like, not exactly creative, but more like strategic, like thinking about what you should be working on. another part of your day where you're really just focusing on the day-to-day administrative tasks. And that goes for, running a practice, for teaching, for whatever. But then also having part of your day for just pure pleasure, whatever it might be, like exercise, watching TV, whatever it is. Like those are essential parts of being a human, is just to have time to relax and to reflect. Could be yoga, could be meditate, who knows? It doesn't really matter to me. But I don't think we teach our students that. I don't think that most firms treat their employees that way either. And so it's been this big struggle in my own of like, how do I learn something I was never taught to do? I was taught to do architecture in a certain way. And so I've been kind of having to forget a lot of that and learn a new way so that there's like a balance between work and life. And that I think too often we wrap up that your life should just be architecture. And I think you can definitely produce good architecture without it killing you. But we don't really teach that, I don't think, in school. So it's, thousands of architects have probably left, thousands of really good architects have probably left the profession because they couldn't stand it anymore. Like that the profession didn't make room for another way of working that was not just as valid, probably more valid as a way of working than the just throwing yourself at the profession until you die.